Chapter 12 of Raymie Nightingale. Things to think about. What book did Raymie choose to read and why? What makes Raymie think everything will work out right in the end? Why had Mr. Stephanopoulos told Raymie to flex her toes and isolate her objective? What is Raymie's objective? And what feeling does Raymie often have? Why does it never pan out? It wasn't until Raymie hung up the phone that she wondered what Mrs. Sylvester meant by a suitable book. She walked into the living room and stood on the yellow shag carpet and stared at the bookcase. All the books were brown and serious. They were her father's books. What if he came back home and one was missing? She felt like maybe it would be best to leave them alone. Raymie went into her room. The shelves over her bed held rocks and seashells and stuffed animals and books. The borrowers? No, it was too unlikely. No normal adult would believe in tiny people who lived under the floorboards. Paddington Bear? Something about the book seemed too bright and silly for the seriousness of a nursing home. Little House in the Big Woods? A really old person had probably lived through all that history and wouldn't want to hear about it again. Then Raymie saw A Bright and Shining Path, The Life of Florence Nightingale. This was a book that Edward Option had given her on the last day of school. Mr. Option was the school librarian. He was very skinny and extremely tall. He had to duck his head to enter and exit the George Mason Willamette Elementary School library. Mr. Option looked too young and uncertain to be a librarian. Also, his ties were too wide, and they were all painted with strange and lonely pictures of deserted beaches, haunted-looking forests, or UFOs. Sometimes when he held up a book, Mr. Option's hands shook with nervousness, or maybe it was excitement. In any case, on the last day of school, Edward Option had said to Raymie, "You are such a good reader, Raymie Clark, that I wonder if you might be interested in diversifying. I have here a nonfiction book that you might enjoy." "Okay," said Raymie, even though she had absolutely no interest in nonfiction. She liked stories. Mr. Option held up A Bright and Shining Path, The Life of Florence Nightingale. On the cover there were dozens of soldiers stretched out on their backs on what looked like a battlefield, and a lady was walking in between, the soldiers, and carrying a lamp over her head, and the men were holding their hands out to her, begging for something. There was no bright and shining path anywhere in sight. It looked like a horrible, depressing book. "Maybe," said Mr. Option, "you could read this over the summer, and then we could talk about it together when school begins." "Okay," said Raymie again. But she only agreed because she liked Mr. Option so much and because he was so tall and lonely and hopeful. She had taken the Florence Nightingale book from him and brought it home and put it on her shelf. A few days later, her father had run away with Leanne Dickerson, and Raymie forgot all about Edward Option and his strange ties and his nonfiction book. But maybe somebody at the Golden Glen nursing home would want to hear about the life of Florence Nightingale and her shining path. Maybe it was exactly what Mrs. Sylvester meant by a suitable book. Maybe everything would work out right in the end. Chapter 13. The Golden Glen nursing home was 4 blocks from Raymie's house. Raymie could have ridden her bike, but she decided to walk so that she would have time to flex her toes and isolate her objectives. Every day in Life Saving 101, Mr. Stephanopoulos had all the students stand on the dock and flex their toes and isolate their objectives. Mr. Stephanopoulos believed that flexing your toes cleared your mind, and that once your mind was clear, it was easy to isolate your objectives and figure out what to do next. For instance, save whoever was drowning. "What is my objective?" whispered Raymie. She stopped and flexed her toes inside her tennis shoes. "My objective is to do a good deed, and also to become Little Miss Central Florida Tire, so that my father will come back home." Her stomach clenched up. What if Louisiana won? What if Beverly sabotaged the contest? What if Raymie's father never came home, no matter what Raymie did? A gigantic seabird flew through Raymie's brain, its talons extended. No, 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 she whispered. She flexed her toes. She cleared her mind. She isolated her objectives. Do a good deed, she thought. Become Little Miss Central Florida Tire. Do a good deed. Do a good deed. After a lot of toe flexing, Raymie arrived at the Golden Glen and discovered that the door was locked. There was a sign that read, "This door is locked. Please ring the bell for admittance." An arrow on the sign pointed to a button. Raymie pressed the button and heard a bell ringing somewhere deep inside the building. She waited. She flexed her toes. An intercom crackled to life. "This is Martha speaking. It's a golden day at the Golden Glen. How may I assist you?" "Hello," said Raymie. "Hello," said the woman named Martha. Said Raymie, "I'm here to do a good deed." "Isn't that wonderful?" said Martha. Raymie wasn't sure if this was a statement or a question, so she said nothing in response. There was a long silence. Raymie said, "I brought a book about Florence Nightingale." "The nurse?" said Martha. Said Raymie, "she has a lamp, and the book is called A Bright and Shining Path, The Life of Florence Nightingale." "Fascinating," said Martha. The intercom gave a lonely crackle. Raymie took a deep breath and she said, "Can I come inside and read the book to someone?" "Of course," said Martha. "I'll buzz you in." There was a long, loud buzz, and Raymie heard the door unlatch. She reached forward and grabbed the handle and entered the Golden Glen. Inside, it smelled like floor wax and old fruit salad and something else, a smell that Raymie did not want to think about too much. A woman with a blue sweater draped over her shoulders stood behind a counter at the end of the hallway. She smiled at Raymie. "Hello," she said. "I'm Martha." "I am the person who is going to read to someone?" said Raymie. She held up Florence Nightingale. Of course," said Martha. She stepped out from behind the counter. "Come with me." She took Raymie's hand and led her up a flight of stairs and into a room where the floor was polished and shining so brightly that it didn't look like a floor at all. It looked like a lake. Raymie's heart thudded and skipped. She had the feeling that she was going to understand things, finally, at last. She had this feeling often, that some truth was going to be revealed to her. She had felt it in the Tag and Bag parking lot with Mr. Stephopoulos when he was telling her goodbye. She had felt it earlier that day standing with Beverly and Louisiana in Ida Nee's backyard. Sometimes she felt it when she was sitting at Mrs. Borkowski's feet. But so far, the feeling had really never really panned out. The truth had never revealed itself, but maybe this time would be different. The room expanded. The brightness got brighter. Raymie thought about safe-cracking and sabotaging and the flying elefantes. She thought about her father sitting in a diner with Leanne Dickerson. She thought about Edgar, the drowning dummy, and gigantic seabirds with wings like angels. She thought about all the things she didn't understand but wanted to. And then the sun went behind a cloud, and the lake turned back into a floor, and Martha said, "Let's just go talk to Isabel." And it was all over. The feeling of almost understanding was gone, and Raymie didn't know any more than she had before. Martha led Raymie over to an old lady sitting in a wheelchair parked by a window. "Isabel's eyesight is not what it once was," said Martha, "so she is not able to read like she used to." "I can read just fine," said Isabel. "Well, that is just not true, Isabel," said Martha. "You are as blind as a bat." Isabel made a fist with her right hand and brought it down on the arm of the wheelchair. "Wham, wham, wham! Don't bother me, Martha," she said. She was a tiny woman, and her hair was pure white, and someone had braided it into a complicated crown on top of her head so that she looked like fairy godmother. Her eyes were very blue. Martha turned to Raymie. "What's your name, child?" she asked. Raymie had never been called child before. She knew that she was a child, of course, but there was something oddly comforting about someone addressing the situation directly. "I'm Raymie," she said. Isabel, said Martha, this is Raymie. So what? Said Isabel. She would like to read to you about the life of Florence Nightingale. You're kidding, said Isabel. Isabel, said Martha, please, the child wants to do a good deed. Isabel looked up at Raymie. Her eyes were bright. She didn't look like she was as blind as a bat. It was more like she had X-ray vision. Raymie could feel Isabel looking right inside her. She squinched up her soul as small as she could and pushed it to one side so that it was hidden. A good deed, said Isabel. Why do you want to do a good deed? What is your purpose exactly? Her purpose? Was that the same thing as an objective? Raymie flexed her toes. Just, to do a good deed, she said. Isabel kept staring at her. Raymie stared back. She made her soul smaller and smaller. She imagined it becoming as tiny as the period at the end of a sentence. No one would ever find it. Fine, said Isabel after what seemed like a very long time. Who cares? Read to me about Florence Nightingale. Isn't that wonderful, said Martha to Raymie. Isabel would like to learn about Florence Nightingale.